Envy is when you're literally like lusting over what somebody else has. And that, I just don't think there really can be much of a positive spin on that.
I found at the root of envy is discontentment. When I'm saying, God, you are not enough, or what you're doing in my life is not enough, I think that's when I'm more prone to or susceptible to experiencing jealousy.
Am I walking in my purpose, like Danielle's purpose? What did God put me on this earth to achieve? And am I walking towards that, or am I walking towards what looks attractive because it's working for somebody else?
I think the deflection of convincing yourself that somebody's life isn't all that it seems is that it then brings you to a place of finding contentment in the woes that somebody might be experiencing.
Thank you so much for being a part of our growing community. It honestly is just such an honour and such a dream to see how Magnify is growing. For anyone who's new to our channel, Magnify is a network, community and platform focused on empowering ambitious women of faith to thrive in our various spheres of influence.
And we know how important it is to have safe, honest, authentic conversations as women of faith. And so we want to provide a space to do that.
My name is Ruth and I'm the founder and CEO of Magnify.
And my name's Rachel and I'm part of Team Magnify. We'll be your hosts and we'll also be featuring guests each time.
So if you like our content, don't forget to like and subscribe, and most importantly, share with a friend who you think would benefit.
Debo Gaspar is a stay-at-home mom and YouTuber. For nearly 10 years, Debo has been creating content on her YouTube channel, Soul Beauty with Debs, which provides encouragement for women of faith and offers practical tips for living a faith-filled life. Danielle Oreoluwa Jinadu is a disability advocate, fashion content creator, and future lawyer. Named Next Gen Trailblazer by the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, she has inspired change in the global health community. In the fashion space, she demonstrates diversity in the area of disability. Debo and Danielle are both present in the social media space, so they are well acquainted with feelings of jealousy that seeing the highlights of others can entail. We're excited to get their take on dealing with jealousy and how faith has helped them in the midst of those feelings. Although we probably don't like to admit it, we're going to have the conversation today around navigating jealousy when we see other people's highlights, and just in the complexity of life, we can become jealous. And even as women of faith, it can be hard to admit that. But as we celebrate people's milestones and see how well other people are doing, sometimes we internalize that negatively and it can become toxic. And so we want to have the conversation because it affects us all in different ways and in different seasons of life. And so we're so pleased to have you both with us to talk about that. And so you're both women of passion and vision, clearly. And of course, especially in the online space where you both are, there is so much comparison and there's just a hotbed, I think, sometimes for jealousy. It's like as if we weren't jealous enough in real life at certain times, then online and on Instagram and everything else, it's easy to compare and become jealous. Debo, can you talk to a little bit about what that's been like? Tell us a bit of your story in relation to navigating some of that.
I think for me, jealousy is not just like this one-off thing. I found that when I have seasons in my life when I'm super fixated on what might be lacking is when I'm more prone to or being susceptible to jealousy. For example, when I was single, before I got to a place of being content in being single, I was fixated on me not being married. So if somebody would share that they're getting engaged or getting married, that would provoke feelings of jealousy. But then the thing with jealousy is it doesn't stop there. It's just, like you said, it can be in different seasons. So, okay, I'm married now. And then in the desire to have children and the planning to have children, it wasn't as straightforward for myself and my husband. You know, unfortunately, we went through recurrent miscarriage, and then somebody announcing that they're having a baby or another baby, that again would provoke feelings of jealousy in me. So it's never, for me, when I look or pay attention to times when I'm susceptible to being jealous, it's oftentimes when I'm super hyperfixated on where I might feel like there's lack in my life.
Yeah. How about you, Danielle? Is that something that you've had to contend with as well?
Yeah, I think for sure. For me, I think with the work I do, so I work in content creation. And one of the biggest things I find with my job is constantly comparing myself to other people, because I literally live in a world of the online comparison game. Like, it's constantly like, is this person's post performing better than mine? Is this person getting better brand deals than me? And I think for me, it's been a constant journey of feeling okay with my position and where I am in life, and realizing like there's a reason where I am is where I am, and there's a reason why I'm doing what I'm doing. Like, my skills are different from other people's, and that's been a constant journey. As you said, it's very much every single day becoming more comfortable with the position I'm in, and also just realizing like the uniqueness that I bring rather than somebody else's. And I think for myself, I'm very competitive too. So that can be one of the biggest problems with comparison and jealousy for me. And I think really just coming to terms with the fact that like it can generally just steal all your joy and take all the good things you're doing away from you has been really tough and important for me.
Yeah, but how have you navigated between like what's being competitive and what's being jealous?
Yeah.
Because I'm quite competitive too, just naturally. I love to win at sport. Like I like to win at things, but I feel like that can sometimes cross a line to becoming unhealthy. Have you kind of figured out where that line is, Danielle?
Yeah.
Do you feel like you have?
I think for sure, for me, it becomes when I am just not even happy for somebody else. When it's a thing of like, I want what you have, I think that's when it goes into a very toxic, negative realm. And I think for me, something that's been really important is noticing when what somebody else is doing is inspiration. And when you're seeing it and you're like, oh, what they're doing is phenomenal, I also want to do what they're doing. Like, why are they doing it and I can't do it? I can for sure do it. And they can also do it at the same time. But when I'm stuck in a position of like, no, I don't want you to have that, I want to just have that for myself, I think that's when it's, no, this is a competition that is going in a very bad way, and I want to like kind of suppress that and deal with that emotion as much as possible.
Yeah. Debo, you spoke about just jealousy obviously can affect us in different seasons, and when we're hyper fixated on what we don't have. And I guess some of it's a lack of gratitude. Some of it is just we really want something and we become fixated on it and we forget that might be coming up, or we struggle sometimes, as you said, Danielle, to be happy for others. What are some of the emotions that you've handled in those times of there's obviously jealousy, but beyond that, what are some of the emotions you've had to contend with?
I think some of the emotions that I've had to contend with is just kind of like this deep, because it just robs you of your joy. So this lack of hope when you're so fixated on, because I think there's a difference between desiring something and it's not happening and you're content. But when there's this desire that you're waiting for and it just seems everyone around you has it but you, it can leave you feeling a bit hopeless. And again, those feelings of jealousy that are sparked in you oftentimes can have really negative emotions, like at its extreme hatred and just anger and just this not wanting somebody to do well or have well, which is not nice. And for me, I found that in the thick of like seasons where I'm experiencing envy, it's just this hopelessness, because I've not focused on actually what, God has blessed me with, and I've not focused on finding contentment on those things. Rather, I'm so hyper fixated on that one thing that is just not happening for me. And I just find myself in a place of just hopelessness. And do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So you mentioned then, Debo, about envy.
Yeah.
To you, what's the difference between envy and jealousy?
I think jealousy, oftentimes it focuses on what's yours and you're protective of it. Like when the Bible says that God is jealous for me. So if I have this phone and somebody is admiring it too much, it's like, that's mine, so it belongs to me. So oftentimes jealousy is you tend to be jealous of what's already yours, whereas envy is now what belongs to somebody else or what's happening for somebody else, and oftentimes can be split between covetousness, where you now want what somebody else has. So I think for me, over the years, I've kind of learned to differentiate between all those emotions. So jealousy, I don't know, I'm married, so I could be jealous over my husband. Whether or not that's right or wrong, I'm yet to delve into that. But things like envy and covetousness, the Bible's really clear on those things not being pleasing to God. And yeah, I think sometimes they can be used interchangeably, but they're all quite different.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've not thought of it that way, actually. Danielle, for you, what are some of, when you're battling aspects of jealousy, like say in that, where it's jumped kind of from being you being competitive to just plain old jealousy or envy. What are some of the other emotions that you've just battled with at that time?
Yeah, I think it's really that feeling of just not feeling good enough and feeling like you're being robbed of something. I think that constantly is what happens for me. It's kind of sitting in your room in that moment where you're just like, why am I not enough, sort of thing. And I think that's when I start to ask myself like questions of like, where is that voice coming from? Or like, what is that actually my internal dialogue? Do I actually genuinely feel that way about me? Or is it just how I feel because I went and watched something on Instagram that made me now feel like I'm the worst thing in the world? And I think it's really important to challenge those emotions. And what you just said about envy, I think is so key, because envy is when you're literally like lusting over what somebody else has. And that, I just don't think there really can be much of a positive spin on that. I think when we're really like obsessing over somebody else's positives or things that are happening for them rather than facing our own situation and moving in gratitude, I think that's where I really see a problem begin that you need to like squash. But
yeah. And I just find as well, especially as a woman of faith, but I think in general, jealousy is the kind of thing that we try to hide because it can be quite an ugly trait. And so I think even when we might be struggling with something else and feel a bit more comfortable to speak to someone about it, when it's something like this and perhaps we feel envious over what somebody else has or what somebody else is going through that we don't have, or I guess sometimes even envious that we have to go through something and somebody else doesn't. Like, there's so many ways of looking at it. What in terms of being women of faith, I think there's a lot of shame attached to that. When you've kind of been walking through these seasons and times where you've been experiencing envy and jealousy, have you felt you can speak to someone about it, or have you just kept it to yourself?
So for me, there have been seasons where I've almost been embarrassed or ashamed to admit it. And in hindsight, I can look back and admit that it was probably pride, because when you think about whether it in like films or even culturally being Nigerian, how envy is oftentimes portrayed. Like in my culture, a jealous or envious person, they would liken them onto being a witch. Do you know what I mean? So it's almost what these emotions are attached to, and you almost want to detach it so far from yourself. Like, no, I'm not a bad person. It's only evil people that experience this emotion, but we all do. And I think one thing that I found, because there was a time when I wouldn't want to share just because of like the shame, but I think one thing that encouraged me is the same way if I was struggling with anything else, like that I would speak to somebody in a faith about. There's a scripture in the Bible that says, confess your sins one to one another that you may be healed. And I feel like when I was really honest with myself and what I was experiencing, I shared it with my husband and one of my friends that actually right now I'm really feeling envious towards this person or about this. And I just really want to bring it to the light so that, because I just don't like this feeling. And I find that the more I conceal it, it's like this consuming fire. It just keeps growing bigger and bigger and bigger. So I think when I was able to really be honest and identify that this is the emotion that I was experiencing, and being able to share that with people that I trust, that can pray for me, that's when I really found that kind of God really helping me, especially when I was able to bring it before God, and God, like, this is what I'm experiencing, and I know, it doesn't please you, please help me, is when like God really helped me to just kind of get over those feelings and just really find contentment.
When you got to the bottom of it, what was really behind it? What do you feel was really driving it?
I think for me, I found at the root of envy is discontentment. When I'm saying, God, you are not enough, or what you're doing in my life is not enough, I think that's when I'm more prone to or susceptible to experiencing jealousy or envy towards others.
Danielle, how about you?
Yeah, I love what you just said, because I always feel like the root emotion behind it is often fear for me. And it's kind of a poverty mindset, I would say, for me, of feeling like if somebody else has something, that means I can't have enough of it. That means that there's not enough seats at the table to accommodate all of us. And I think as a Black woman, that happened a lot with me when I was younger, and kind of working about going into the industry I'm in now, constantly feeling like, oh, that brand already has a Black woman that promotes their content, that means I can't also fit in that space. Or even just in school, literally feeling like you had to be that singular black girl that was good enough. And if somebody else has it, that means I can no longer have it. So I think for me, it's really that fear, poverty mindset of like, really, I have to ask myself that question of like, is God truly who he says he is? Can he be provider for all of us? Because there's so many of us on this planet, and there's so many people that may have a talent and a skill that is so like what I have. And really just realizing, my favorite thing about God, I always say this, is he makes me feel like an only child. And I feel like, I have a lot of siblings, I'm one of 6. And I just always feel like I love that, because it really feels like there is enough blessing to come for me, for you, for everybody else. And I think for me, dealing with that fear of kind of just being without has been important for me. And I think I'm constantly dealing with it though. Like, it's not something that's completely gone. It's not something that I'm free from. I'm constantly challenging that thought, because I think for myself, I can be very possessive as a person. I think it kind of all goes with the competitiveness. I'm just very like, this is what I do. This is what I bring to the table. If somebody else is bringing it to the table, I feel like I'm often feeling quite challenged. So I do generally think this is a topic I'm constantly going over in my head and fixing my internal conversation and just trusting the faithfulness and the goodness of God, that he is a provider, and Jehovah Jireh can do it for all of us, essentially. But yeah.
Yeah, one of my friends said that like there's enough toys for everyone to play with, which sounds funny, but then sometimes you want the toy that someone else has got, and that's envy. That's what you were saying, Debo. And I think in the middle of all of that, it's almost a scarcity mindset, like you're saying, or a poverty mindset sometimes that drives it, or fear or discontentment. I certainly think for me, sometimes out of fear and discontentment, we start to look at everything else, fixate on everything else. We lose gratitude. We kind of forget that maybe some of the things we have that we've maybe prayed for before, worked for, we've got them and we're no longer content with them anymore. Because I do think there's so much shame around jealousy. I think it's easy to hide things straight away, and it just tends to grow more in the dark. I think you said, Debo, like the more you try and hide it, kind of the worse it gets. But then I understand like some of the shame that can be coupled to it. How do you think, like just from your learnings, how do you think we can practically get better at being open on things like jealousy? So
for me, because I'm able to be honest with myself and identify it, I have to catch it at the root. So it's not isolated to like, oh, I'm jealous of everybody with a red car. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes somebody might say something, or somebody might share a news, and you get that little sting within you, and immediately it could happen now, and I'm going through it in my head like, Debo, what is that? And ultimately, does that please God? And I found for myself, I have to nip it immediately, because if I don't and think that, oh, just forget about it, then I'll find myself without realizing that this ugly thing is growing and growing and growing. So I found that immediately identifying it, if it's a case where I need to share it with somebody like my husband or close friends of mine, I will, just for accountability sake. And the reason I'm so like, when it comes to that particular thing, is because I know what it's like to be completely consumed by it. So I just don't want to leave any room for that now in this season of my life. So because I've been in that place for a while where I didn't know what I was experiencing was envy. I didn't know it at all. I just thought, I just don't like that person. Do you get what I'm saying? I thought I was driven, but I just don't like her. But I didn't realize that the emotion that I'd been experiencing for so long was actually envy. And it's so crazy, because I remember praying to God, like, God, how comes I just don't like this person? Help me to like her, help me to love her as I love myself. So I'm praying for something completely different until I went to God and was like, what is it? And God was like, it's envy. And you can't repent of something that if you're not aware what it is. So for me, once I understood that thing that was consuming me for so long was actually envy, I'm better able to identify when it wants to pop its ugly head back and be like, no, and nip it immediately.
So you realized envy was at the root. How was that coming across though before you realized that?
It was
But
just,
what did you think it was?
I just thought it was like, oh, I just don't like this person. Like, they're always showing off, and do you know what I mean? And I think the thing with like envy is it does oftentimes, it can trickle into so many different things, and one being offense. So everything a said person will do will just offend you. Like, they could post a yellow flower and it's like, why? It's autumn, you should post a pink one, you loser. Do you know what I mean? And it just kind of, it magnifies everything this person does and just makes it way bigger than what it is. And that was my case. I just thought it was just, I just don't like this person. And I didn't realize it was actually envy at the root of it.
I think being able to catch things at the root is so key. It's just self-reflection is huge in this as well, isn't it? And being able to identify, what is this that I'm actually feeling? And I think sometimes the shame around feeling envy or jealous stops us from entering that process. Rather than denying the emotion, it's kind of like, yeah, I'm feeling this. Now, what do I need to do with it? It's kind of an invitation to look deeper at, okay, how do I actually navigate this now? God help me, or I'm going to share it with someone, or I'm going to go on a bit of a process of self-discovery. What's driving this? Danielle, when you've gone through seasons maybe where you felt a bit more jealous, or where, just in the world of your work, it's been more difficult to not be jealous, and how many likes has this person got, and why has their post performed better than mine? What has your conversation with God been like during those times?
I think for me, it's really what you said in terms of taking every thought captive. Like, I think one of the best things that I had growing up is my mum was like one of these people that was just incredibly self-aware. Like, I don't know why I was doing personality tests at like 10 years old. And I literally was there ticking out like, oh, I think I'm like a sanguine. Like, oh no, I'm not a sanguine. I'm powerful choleric. Like, I don't know why I was doing that so young, but I was. And I think it just helped me have this level of self-awareness. So I know, as somebody that is a bit of a powerful choleric melancholy person, I can get in my head, but also what is in my head is very intense and powerful. And it's this whole thing going around of competitiveness and blah, blah, blah. I'm constantly dealing with that. And for me, what helped with that is I have a sister that's the opposite of me, let's just say. I call myself black and white, and I call her the grey. And I think it's important for everybody to have that person in their life that is like somebody that complements the things that they don't have. So I'll go to her with my internal monologue. And something that's wonderful about her is like, she doesn't make me feel ashamed. So I go to her with a ton of shame, and she's just like, that's a completely normal human reaction. But I want you to think about this, and I want you to think about this. And it's kind of like a therapist, but I just feel like everybody should have that person where they feel like their thoughts can be really carried and taken care of well. So I take a thought captive, but when I really want to inspect it, I can go and have those conversations, and kind of, she'll ask me like, why do you feel this way about that person? That's it, exactly that. Why do you feel like they have something you don't have? And actually, is this coming from an inadequacy that is in you, but long before this person ever came into the situation? And something that was quite interesting with me growing up is, as somebody that experiences and deals with disability, I feel like I constantly was feeling just not enough. So that constant feeling of, I would call it probably envy of health, was like a big thing for me. Like, I was just like, oh, all my friends can go here and do this and I can't do that. And I think I was constantly having to deal with that. And for me, it just was really about coming to terms with my position, and also the blessings that came from my position, which is really weird because now I think I'm like an old lady, but in a young person's body. So I feel like I have a wisdom for an old lady, but it's in a young body now. And I'm really grateful for that. But it took me a really long time, and it took me kind of questioning where my emotions was coming from constantly, and bringing it to God and asking God about his goodness. I think that was for me the constant thing. It's like, okay, God, you say you're good, show up for me now in this way. Like, help me to get through this challenge, help me to get through this other thing that I'm dealing with. And I think after that process of constantly being like, okay, I believe in your faithfulness, I believe that you'll show up for me here, even if I feel like everybody has this and I don't have this. For me, that was literally health. Like, I graduated later than a lot of people. So I would just have to have those constant conversations. I'm a write it down and speak it out person. So I did a lot of that. And also for me, I love affirmation and like words. And I truly believe death and life is in the power of the tongue. So I'm out here doing like Joyce Meyer's like list of confessions on your daily, like, and I think that was really important for me.
Yeah. Because I think it's normal, especially in a thing of health, something that's so fundamental, to feel like, hang on, why is it so easy for that person and it's so difficult for me, and for it to have an actual impact on your life? How have you been able to differentiate between just the normal thing of just feeling a bit sad about your situation sometimes, and then it crossing a line to where you can become bitter? Do you feel like you found that line and been able to stay?
I do. I 100% think it is a line that you need to figure out, because there shouldn't be shame around feeling upset about your situation, essentially. And something I love Brené Brown, and Brené Brown often talks about this thing of shame and how it says like, this is who I am. And I think there should be the difference between accountability and realizing like why you feel this way, and realizing your situation, and like shame being over you. Like, I feel like it's okay to take responsibility for something and walk in accountability and be like, oh, this feeling isn't making sense. I'm not comfortable with this feeling. I want to work on this feeling. And that should be a very different sort of situation to when you're like, no, like I'm just going around and being extremely bitter and envious about people. And I think I've had to really realize that line. I think I keep on saying what you said, but it really is, in terms of it becoming like this ugly beast. That is it. It's really who you are when you enter your room and nobody else is there. I think that's really the thing that I think about. Like, am I talking negatively about people in my head that I really have no reason to be talking about them that badly? And I think constantly challenging those thoughts, I think that's really what it is. The bitterness and that resentment comes in when you kind of allow yourself to go off and you don't grab it and say, no, we're not doing that. And something I've actually been practicing is complimenting people in my head. So if I see somebody that has something I want, somebody that is doing something I want to do, I'll be like, yeah, they should be doing that. They're amazing. In fact, let me say these reasons why they're amazing. In my head, like, that's something I've been consciously trying to do. So it's like, instead of, treat it with something else that is toxic, instead of continuously going down that, I'm trying to bring it back to the sort of place I want my brain to be and the sort of person I want to be. I don't want to be somebody that's just talking trash about people in my head.
Yeah, it's a great practice, actually. Debo, so in some of the things you were sharing before, you were saying how you didn't even realize that you were battling with jealousy and envy. You thought it was something else. You thought, I just didn't like this person. They just rubbed me up the wrong way. In those times, what were some of the byproducts of that? So what were some of the emotions or some of the feelings or some of the ways that you acted as a byproduct of envy, even when you didn't realize that's what it was?
Yeah, I think for me, it stippled into comparison. So I developed this superiority complex. So with comparison, I think there's like this inferior or superior. The inferior is like, oh, woe is me. Oh, I just want to be like so-and-so. Whereas superior is like, I'm better than you and I need to prove to you that I'm better than you. So it was just this really toxic, want to one-up you all the time. And, I want to prove to myself that I'm better than you. And it just, the motive was so ugly. And I don't believe that jealousy or envy is a healthy motivator to do anything, because it's never content. And it's just this fire that it's like like a forest fire. It just spreads. So I found that when I didn't realize actually it was envy, I found myself in this place where it was just this constant comparison trap. So, okay, they're doing this. I need to do this. I need to prove that.
I think that's why we seek to hide it sometimes, because we don't want people to see that. Because this is not who I really am. I want to celebrate others, but I actually want to grow too. And it's quite a complex emotion to deal with. Obviously, we talk a lot about seeing people's highlight reel on Instagram and on stories. We just see people's highlight reel. I wonder, though, and it's a question, have we used that sometimes as a bit of a deflection to make ourselves feel better? Does that make sense? So it's kind of like, well, this is someone's highlight reel, so they'll have loads of bad stuff going on, so it's fine. Their life's probably a bit of a mess too, so I feel better about mine again. Because I think that leans into the superiority complex that you just...
Yeah, and I think it's such a deflection. And one thing recently that I've used to other than obviously God bringing me to a place of finding contentment, I've also placed myself in, I have to assume that everything that somebody's showing online is 100% like who they are behind the scenes. Because I think the deflection of convincing yourself that somebody's life isn't all that it seems is that it then brings you to a place of finding contentment in the woes that somebody might be experiencing. And, the Bible tells us to rejoice with those who are rejoicing and to mourn with those who are mourning. And you end up doing the opposite. If your theme of life is social media reels highlights, it's not real, it's 10%. I think it distracts you from focusing and going to the actual root of the emotion that you're experiencing and dealing with it. So now when I see things, I just assume that their life online is as good as it is offline as it is online. And I don't want to console myself with, it's just a highlight reel, because that's not dealing with the issue for me anyway.
Yeah, I think that's great insight.
Yeah, can I ask, what about you on that subject? How have you dealt with that?
Yeah, I asked the question because I think sometimes I've thought, well, okay, everybody has highs and lows, which is true. Like, we know what we see from people online is part of the reality, right? So we know that. We know if we're real human beings, people have health challenges, they have relational challenges, they have financial challenges. They also have really high highs and sometimes really, really lows. And for a lot of us, a lot of being in the middle. But I think historically, yes, I've looked at people's highlights and thought, oh, wow, it just seems like things are always going well for them. But it doesn't matter, because they'll have some sad things. And I relate so much to what you're saying, though, Debo, that that's how sometimes we soothe ourselves. We try to put that on as a balm. So we think, oh, I feel better because my life's not that good. I'm not that happy with it. Or it deflects us again from gratitude and being present where we are. I think that's a big thing. We sometimes think we want what somebody else has, but we don't always know what price they've paid to get there. We don't know the ins and outs. So it's not just looking, oh, they've got that, it looked like it came easy to them. It's also recognizing you don't actually know the story of why they are where they are. And same for me, some people, I don't know, some people might look at me and think, oh, it seems like they've got everything going on for them. And it's kind of like, sometimes the thing I think we think we're envious for, we don't even know that that's actually what we want. And if we had it, would it stop us being envious? Would it stop us being jealous? So I think definitely I've used that as a deflection before. It's like being content in their doom. Almost.
And it's just, when you say it out loud, it's so wild. Yeah, I can be happy because bad things happen in somebody's life. If you say it out loud, it's crazy. And I think when I had to be honest with those emotions and feelings, and I do believe our emotions are a gift from God and we're humans. And I think it's inevitable to say we're never going to experience these emotions that aren't good, that don't please God. But I think the beauty of it is that we can bring it before God. We can lament. There's a whole book in the Bible on lamenting. So I don't think there's anything wrong with being in a place where it's like, God, this is what's happening. I'm not happy about it. I think the beauty is that we can take it to God and He can give us the grace to find contentment. I think the problem lies is when we don't do that, and then we're then consumed by all the byproducts of this particular thing and then birth in us. And it's so funny, just to add to what you said, I think you were saying that some people can look at, they can see the success but not know what happened in the background. And I remember somebody recently had said that to me, because I shared a bit about, on my YouTube, I shared a bit about just the journey to having children and the recurrent miscarriage. And a lot of people didn't know that, because I've got two daughters that are 16 months apart. Somebody just thought, I just thought you were super fertile when you're just popping out babies. But no, that was literally the grace of God. And it's like, they were from a point of view, they were really honest and were like, I'm single and I followed your YouTube journey where you were single and now you're married and having kids. And I was just like, oh, she's having, but you don't know what it took for me to get to this place where I can actually now share the joys of having children. And it all comes down to being able to rejoice with those who are rejoicing and actually mourning with those who are mourning, because jealousy or envy leads us to do the opposite. You know, somebody's, something good is happening and you're mourning, and then they're going through a hard time. It's kind of like with the whole deflecting and, oh yeah, things can happen. It's not all that it seems. And actually you find that you're rejoicing in the reality that things might not be going well for somebody. And I think if we say these things out loud, it's just like, God, wow, please help me.
Yeah, we need help with it sometimes.
I do think for me, though, one thing that's been important from my position, because I feel like I'm on the other side of somebody that may look like they've got their stuff together, because I'm just like, oh, people comment on my Instagram or what I'm doing or the content and collaborations I'm getting. But something I've taken upon myself is, from the onset of using my Instagram, is just to be unbelievably open and transparent about my journey and be like, yeah, okay, I graduated from a really good university today, blah, blah, blah. But here's how many hospitalizations I had along the way. And I think it's really important to kind of show the cost, right? Because I think for people, they can often see the success and just be like, oh, this was handed to you, or like this was easy for you. And I generally think, from my position, I never want people to have like a false imagination or story in their head about my life. Like, I don't want that. I want it to be very real and very candid and be like, no, this is what I went through in order to get here. Yes, this is wonderful. Glory to God. I'm so grateful. But this is literally the day in, the day out. And like, I'll literally show, here's my hospital day of the month, guys. Like, this is what I'm doing today. I'm having my blood transfusion that comes around every single month. And I think it's really important to show that and just show that, life is generally complex. And I do agree with what you're saying about the rejoicing with those who are rejoicing and mourning with those who are mourning. I think that's 100% true. But I think from the other perspective, on the other side, I think it's really important for us also not to present a false narrative about ourselves that allows people to think that, everything is perfect. I think that is the problem of social media at the moment, that we are just seeing a lot of glitz and glamour, but also not seeing the toll, like all of these different things and how difficult it may be.
Yeah, Danielle, it struck me before when you said about, you talking about trusting God and almost like, do I really believe God is who he says he is? Do you think that plays a lot into why we become jealous and envious in the first place?
100%. I think it all comes down to that if question that I think we were met with, like humanity was met with, not to sound like a pastor, but at the beginning of time, I think we were met with that if question, like, is God really as good as he says he is? Is God actually going to show up for you in the way that you believe he will? And I think that's the constant challenge that we have to deal with as human beings. It's trusting that his provision is enough for you. It's trusting that he is good. It's trusting that he's doing all things for your good at all times and his glory. And I think something I had to come to terms with is sometimes the good and the glory, it doesn't look how you wanted it to. Like, I think that's for me, I had to constantly come to that understanding, because there's been ways in my life where I felt like God has got more glory from the thing that actually felt more challenging to me. So I'm just like, I don't really know if this works. I don't really know if this is what I had in mind, but that is the way in which the good and the glory can go together. But yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Practically, for you, Debo, how have you been able to like guard your own heart and mind? Because obviously you've obviously struggled with jealousy before, like, haven't we all, right? For different seasons, at different levels of intensity. But we obviously want to grow and kind of, like you were saying before, catch things at the root. Practically, how do you, as well as catching things at the root, how do you just generally guard yourself and stay on your own path?
I think short term, what has worked for me in the past was, especially when in relation to social media, is just taking a break. I found that when I was able to take a break from this social realm and just be quiet and just quiet my life, my thoughts, my mind, I'm able to really understand the area that I feel like there may be a lack in, and just really trust God, whether it is his will or plan for me or not. I always find for myself that God leads me to a place of contentment. So I think a practical step that has really helped me with regards to envy online is just taking a break for a bit, But I find that the break more so helps just for a short term, because when you come back online, it could be something else. I think long term is definitely contentment and just really, really just finding that contentment in the now and just being thankful. I find that when I really thank God and I really focus on the things in my life that God has done, even the grace to wake up, when I start my day with thanks, when I just walk around and I pace and I'm like, God, thank you for this, thank you for that, thank you. It almost starts to minimize the areas of my life where there may be envy, because I'm not focusing on that. I think when you have like an attitude of gratitude and thankfulness to God, it really reduces what might seem like this big lack. It almost it reduces it to nothing oftentimes.
Yeah. What about you, Danielle? Practically, how do you kind of stay fixed on the path that's ahead of you and feel pleased with that and content with that and work hard at that?
I think for me, it's coming to terms with the unique call of God that is on every single individual. I think that's what I had to do, because I don't see a lot of people that look like me necessarily in my space, physically, health-wise, all the different things that make me up as an individual. I don't see a lot of that. So I think for me, it was just coming to terms with the unique way in which I'm going to operate through this world. And also the gift that will be hopefully to other people as they come up, seeing somebody else that looks like them, maybe doing the things that they want to do more. So I think it's, for me, having a gratitude about my experiences and what makes me me, and realizing and recognizing that that is important in this world and there's a reason for me being here. I think that is a constant reminder I give myself, because it also just allows me to feel empowered and happy about my situation and not focusing on other people's situation all the time. And then I think gratitude is just a practice of your daily life. Genuinely, I think it minimizes everything else when you're able to be like, but God, you know, I may want this, but look at all of this that you've done for me. Look at the faithfulness that has continuously displayed itself in my life. And I think that attitude of gratitude, as you said, can really just heal a multitude of wounds. I really feel like it can just fix a lot of problems. And I practically write down, like, in the morning, I do this thing where, you know, you can do in your notes, I write a few things that I'm grateful for. I try and do it every day. It's not that great, but I have a little file and I try and do it really often. And I think also just constantly walking around with that thankful attitude, like really, and I say it, but I genuinely mean it. Like saying thank you for everything because you go throughout the day is really important to me. And yeah, I think taking stock of what you have more than looking at what other people have. I don't leave social media as much because it's my job. But when I'm there, I think it's also practicing guarding your space. I guard my space on Instagram. So there's not everything I need to see. There are literally people I don't follow because I know that following them could make me feel envious. And I don't want to do that. And I don't think that is a problem to protect your mind, because you know who you are, you know your issues, you know what you deal with. Sometimes it's a simple mute. Like it's just mute things that are going to feed that part of yourself that you don't want to feed. And I take that seriously because I think, as I said, I can't necessarily leave the app as much. So I just protect and guard my heart when I'm in that space and make sure I'm trying to cultivate that sort of person that I want to be at all times. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think as well, in faith circles where we are, we talk a lot about passion and purpose and pursuing what's ahead of us, like following our dreams, pursuing who God's called us to be. But I also think sometimes in an unhealthy way, we put that beside being a renowned success. And I'm not sure the two are always the same thing. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that when it comes to success, our standard and God's standard is very different. It almost reminds me in the Bible where I think it was, I can't remember, Jesse or somebody to look for the next king. And they've looked at the physical stature of one of David's brothers and they've said, oh, it's going to be him. But God is like, no, it's David. And I think when you measure even through human eyes, we tend to measure the success by big, bold announcements. And I think, for example, me, myself being a homemaker, that can almost kind of be like looked down on as the least, but I found great success in that. You know, the Bible speaks about Titus 2, like paying attention to your home, and I'm doing that as unto God. And I think to kind of find contentment in where we are and the successes that we desire in every season of our lives, to do it as unto God. So if I'm washing dishes, it's going to be as unto God. If I'm applying for a job, it's going to be as unto God. If I'm an entrepreneur, it's going to be as unto God. And I think by knowing that our work is unto God, we know that the measure of our success is beyond this earth. And I think that is the mindset that has helped me. So to some, I might not be successful, but I'm really successful. I'm so proud to be able to serve my family, to be able to serve my children. And I am successful because I do it as unto God. So I think looking at things from kind of like a heavenly perspective and not earthly will really change the trajectory on what we actually value and mark as success.
I think that sometimes impacts jealousy in a positive way as well, because we focus more on like what is a success for me, not just like what does everybody else deem as successful. And I know we obviously in the world we have things we would say, oh, they've done great with that. I don't think there's a problem with that. I just think when that becomes our ultimate definition, it's easier to become jealous because we automatically feel behind, or like we lack, or we're not as good at. There's always going to be somebody who's better at something, has more than us, is more skilled. And you get into, it's not just comparison, we can become envious of that. But I love what you said about success, and God's definition of that is actually so much different
to ours. Different. It's so different. And I think that's where the beauty lies. The Bible speaks about God has prepared good works in advance for us to do. And I think when we are focusing on what God wants to do in our lives, we're able to achieve those things. And it's almost like, if I'm focused on what somebody else is doing, I'm achieving what God has called them to do, and I'm neglecting what actually God has for me. It's like, imagine there's two people taking an exam and Sally got 85%. And that was the highest score. So because Sally is my reference and my benchmark for success, I'm going to aim to get 87% so I can beat her record high. So I'm only studying for 87%. What if God wanted me to have 100%? And I think that's the problem. When we're focused on what God is doing in somebody else's life, it minimizes and reduces and almost kind of delays actually the good works that he has in advance for us to do. There's things that he's called us to do before the foundations of this earth were set. And I think that's where I find my confidence that God, who knows my end from my beginning, he knows the path my life is going to go, and finding contentment in that really keeps me from focusing on what he may be doing in other people's life. And just to add to another kind of practical thing that has helped me, if I do find myself to be tempted to be envious of somebody, I pray for them. And I found that, I remember the first time God challenged me to do that, it really stung. And I remember actually crying, like, God, I don't want to pray for them. No, it's painful. I don't want to do that. But the moment I was able to be like, God, bless this person even more. Bless them, God. Let them be successful. It changes your heart, and actually you're able to love, like, you know, where the Bible calls us to love God and love people. And I found that when I'm tempted to be envious of somebody, to just immediately pray for them. Just pray, God bless them. Thank you for what they're doing in their lives. Keep doing it in their life. And not just so I can say, bless them, God. Okay, and then you can bless me. I don't even add my own prayer in that. I'm just genuinely praying for them. And I think it's very difficult to remain envious of somebody if you're constantly presenting them before God in prayer.
Yeah, it almost becomes a bit of a protection against it in some ways, even though we know we'll struggle again. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to do that. Danielle, what do you think in terms of how we define success? Because I think that can feed, you know, talking before about like feeding envy and feeding jealousy. I do think how we define success can feed our jealousy more. So you're saying some people I'll mute, some people I'll kind of not pay attention to just because I know there's a part of me that's a bit broken or that I struggle with. What are your thoughts on that and definitions of success and how we not only stay in our lane, but guard against being jealous of things that maybe are not even for us?
Yeah, I think for me, it's really seeing success how God sees success, which is the heart, like that is what God places above all things. And I think for me, it's a constant challenging of, okay, but how is my heart? Because I could be doing amazing and everything on the surface of it could look phenomenal. But when I get to heaven, God's not going to be like, well done for that amazing campaign you did with Chanel. He's going to be like, were you a loving, kind person? He's going to ask me about my character. That's the conversations we're going to have. So I think for me, it's constantly dealing with character. It's constantly, success for me would be a person that is really upstanding in terms of who I am as a person. It's clear to other people that I carry and walk around with like a Christ-given mandate, and I'm not just doing what everybody in the world is doing. I'm doing what I feel like God has called me to do. And I think I also am very mindful of that. Am I walking in my purpose, like Danielle's purpose? What did God put me on this earth to achieve? And am I walking towards that, or am I walking towards what looks attractive because it's working for somebody else? And I think that's how I deem success for me. And that has been one of the biggest things in challenging envy and challenging jealousy, because it's something that actually nobody else can do. It's very much specific to me because, yeah, there's nobody on earth that has my exact same situation and exact same story. So there's nobody else that can actually do this. And I think if we see ourselves very individual, like if like obviously we exist in community, but if we see ourselves as a true individual that has a God-given purpose, because I think it's really what you said, isn't it? It's that whole feeling of reminding ourselves that like when we were in the womb, God was like knitting us together. He was like, I want you to be this way and this way. I love this personality trait about you, and I want to put that in there to achieve a particular purpose in this earth. I think if we're really in touch with that and we've spent time with God enough to know what it is that we're here to do, I think comparison kind of goes out the window because there's nobody else that can do it but you. And I think that's a practice of mine that has been continuous. Yeah.
So obviously we know gratitude and being thankful is so important. It's part of who we are, especially if we call ourselves women of faith. But I wonder if we lean too much into that sometimes. There's some things we're not really thankful for, we're not grateful for, and they're very difficult and hard to handle. What do we do with that?
I think God is so good, and oftentimes it's almost towards the end of going through something really difficult that I'm able to find gratitude when I look at personal circumstances. You know, there's a scripture in the Bible said that it was good for me to be afflicted because through it I know the statutes of God. And I remember going through recurrent miscarriage, and it was really, really difficult. You know, but God really took me through the motions as I was going through it. I started off that journey of miscarriage thinking, what have I done to offend you, God? Is there some secret sin in my life that I don't know that is causing everything that is actually not in line with God? Because God is a good father and he's not punishing me. But actually through my suffering, he allowed me to see who he is and actually unlearn some mindsets that I'd carried towards God. I think I had this very hyper prosperity gospel mindset that I'm a Christian, so no bad thing is ever going to happen to me. And I didn't realize that until I went through that very difficult season of suffering. And I remember saying to her, literally, I think verbatim, this is going to sound so crazy, but I'm actually really grateful that God will it's almost like a privilege that I'll go through this very difficult time because I've never known God as I know him now. There's just something about going through difficulty or suffering that pushes us to God, that really allows us to rest in him. Like, you know, when things, and there's nothing wrong with joyous seasons. I praise God for both. Like the Bible says it rains on the just and the unjust. When you look at Job's life and he went through all those difficulties, even to the glory of God, the Bible says that his latter was even greater than his beginning. And there's just something about, I know it's very difficult to tell somebody to find gratitude, but honestly, when we know who God is and that he is good and he withholds no good things from those who he loves, we'll really find contentment in that. And just to kind of finish my point is, you know, Philippians in the Bible is often seen as one of the happiest books in the Bible. Well, when Paul wrote that, he was in prison. And he could have, his prayer in every text, every verse, you could have seen, God, take me out of this place, take me out of prison, get me out of here. But this is the happiest, most joyous book in the Bible. This man was in prison, in chains, and he was so great. He said, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So meaning and I know that scripture oftentimes is misused, I can be a lawyer, or I can do this brain surgery without being qualified, but really what he meant is that, in all seasons, in all circumstances, I can do all things. I can find contentment right here because of God. And it is okay to lament. Like I said, there's a whole book in the Bible on it. It's absolutely fine to lament. I think lamenting is a gift and it brings us closer to the cross. But, Philippians was written in prison. Yet it was the happiest, most joyous book in the Bible. I know it's difficult. I know if somebody has said to me at the thick of going through miscarriage, just, be grateful. That's difficult. But somewhere in the journey of suffering, God gives us the grace to find contentment. And the contentment I found was knowing that I have a good Father in heaven who loves me. And he brought me to a place of contentment. Because I remember saying to God, Lord, in not having children, I cannot say that you're enough for me. That would be a complete lie. I cannot say that, but I want to be able to say that. And not too long after, God genuinely brought me to a place that if I never, ever, ever had children, I would still be content because God is enough for me. And that same month, I conceived my firstborn daughter. And by the grace of God, that pregnancy went to term. But my point is that as believers, we have to find contentment, knowing that God alone is good and he is enough. In spite of what we think we need or we want, he withholds no good things from those he loves.
And I think that gratitude is not so much for what we're going through or what we're dealing with or the suffering, but it's knowing God's with us in the middle of it and that he's kind of above it. I think is where we begin to see, when we're sometimes really searching for things to be grateful for. Okay, I'm not grateful for what I'm going through. I'm not thankful for what I walked through, but I'm grateful that God's with me in it.
And he's so, honestly, I feel like it's so crazy, but because I feel like the seasons where I've experienced the closeness and this intimacy of God is when I've got a contrite heart, when I'm broken. Do you know what I mean? And I've been praying recently, God, I really want to experience that even with you in joyous seasons. Do you know what I mean? I want to experience that. But for me, I feel like there's just such a beauty in even the reigning of life where we can know God not only as a father but as a friend, as a comforter, and actually going through difficult seasons. I think Corinthians says that may the God of peace comfort you as I have been comforted. And that's oftentimes a prayer that I pray for those who I know are going through difficult seasons. I really want you to experience that comfort that God, it's like you will never know that God is a comforter unless you need that comfort. You will never know that God is good unless you've been in a situation that is bad. And I think as believers, maybe there's a lot that we have to unlearn, because I had to unlearn this whole prosperity. My life is always going to be rosy. Why is this happening to me? I'm a Christian. And actually, when I understood the reality that this is just life, we live in a fallen world, things are not always going to be perfect, I was able to go through life in seasons, just really finding contentment. That's not to say I'm not tempted to not be content, but I think for me, the basis of not being envious or covetousness for me is really remaining in a place of contentment.
Yeah, that's good. Danielle, how about you? In the thoughts of gratitude and how do we find gratitude and thankfulness when really we're not grateful or thankful? In your situation as well, you've spoken a little bit about some of the disabilities that you've got and that you walk with. How does that look for you?
I think that has been one of the biggest lessons of my life, actually, because I have sickle cell anemia and a multitude of other conditions. Sickle cell anemia is just the one I like to talk about the most. And I think for me, one of the biggest things I really learn and now rest upon is this verse in James. I think is count it pure joy when you go through hardships because it produces perseverance. And I think there's other versions and stuff like that say, you know, in end, it means that you'll be lacking of nothing. And I think for me, that has been fundamental because I was somebody, like as a kid, I was in and out of hospital, first blood transfusion, 5 years old, first year of university, I had 12 hospital admissions. I had like a life-threatening pneumonia, like somewhere in the middle of that degree. Literally was just in and out. It was non-stop. And I'm also, funnily enough, from a family of people that all have conditions. So like all of my 2 biological siblings, both of them have their own health conditions. My sister had a liver transplant. And I remember going through all of these. It was really easy to be like, there was a time of my life I remember thinking that like my family was Job, like we were the Job family. Like I was literally like, I don't know what this mandate is, but it seems to be real. And I just think coming to terms with that count it pure joy was really real for me because honestly, those are actually the seasons now that I don't want to say I crave them, but I crave the intimacy with God that I had. Genuinely, when there is nothing else that is working and making sense, and the only thing that is working and making sense is you're just able to hear the voice of God like no other time, that is really something to rest upon. And I think those have been the most fundamental moments of character development in my life. Like I am still living off the fruits of those seasons. And it's funny because at the time of it on the surface, they were ugly seasons. I was in hospital. I remember in the pandemic, like it was COVID time and you weren't even allowed visitors. So that was like a whole new level for me because growing up, I always had my family and my church family always there for me. But when it was pandemic and I was like being diagnosed with a few more conditions 2 weeks before my final year exams at Warwick, I remember literally just being like, okay, this is a new low, God. I've not experienced this one before. Like I was really like, sir, I'm not having it. And I think it was just, again, coming to that level of God, like, I genuinely know your faithfulness. I've seen you before. I've seen you. I've heard you talk to me. I've heard you walk through these different things of life with me. And I know that you'll do it again because you don't change. Your character is unchanging. It's unwavering. And I think for me, that was the biggest thing. And it's having gratitude for the person you're going to be when you come out of the storm, I think is what has helped me now. So I may be going through it and be like, this doesn't feel good, but I'm like, okay, I'm about to level up. Like that's something I've always kind of got in the back of my head when I'm going through things that are difficult. I'm just like, oh, you want to take me deeper? Cool, let's go. Sometimes I'm obviously like, I don't want this. In fact, I think my character is so developed. Please leave me alone. Like, I think I have that conversation constantly and I'm just like, I'm good. But I think, I think that's the thing I want to leave this earth really knowing that my intimacy with God was so deep and beautiful. And I really knew him as a friend and as a father and as a comforter because these are the seasons where you really get to see him show up like no other. It's when we don't have all these other things that get in the way that kind of make us feel content with life, but in a superficial way. So I think often it's easy to be like, oh, I'm happy, I'm content when success is working out for you. And like, it's easy to be grateful when you've got money, when you've got things. But when your body is literally your worst enemy, being content and being grateful, different ball game. And if you can say that you somewhat mastered that, I think you can be like, okay, I know what I'm doing in life. Like, I've got this together. Like, God, cool. And I think, I don't even say this to say that I've completely mastered it now. It's a continuous journey. But for me, I think really just knowing that it's time for you to grow in intimacy in your relationship with God is just so important. And I think I'm constantly going back to that. And also something that I've been thinking about recently a lot is not settling for the Ishmaels, like the things that come before the waiting. So I'm also really interested in waiting for what God has for me, that's like God's best for me, rather than trying to get a quick fix now. Because I think sometimes you can try and get out of difficult situations. And like when you see somebody else is doing something that's amazing, you can try and speed up the process of like where you want to be and how comes they're there yet. And like, I feel like I'm slow and I'm behind in life. But I think that there's a lot of counterfeits that we can experience because we've been trying to speed up the process rather than allow God to do the development and the character development he wants to do in our life. And I think this goes back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of when dealing with envy, when dealing with jealousy, remembering God's specific purposes for you. And if you have a true understanding of that, and if you spent enough time really trying to figure out what he wants you to be, and you're walking in alignment with that, I think it's a lot easier not to get carried away with counterfeits and things that look good, but they may not be God's best for you. So I think when you're focused on God's best for you, it's a lot easier not to be distracted.
Yeah. Well, ladies, thank you so much for such a real, just your vulnerability and an authentic conversation. I think it's clear, like, jealousy is envy. They're a difficult emotion to deal with, the one that sometimes we want to hide, but when we bring it out to the light in the right space, in a safe space, and especially before God, he can help us process it and deal with it and actually come to a place of contentment. And I guess even finding gratitude, as you've both just beautifully expressed, even in the most complex things, even through suffering, being grateful for the person we're going to become, being grateful for where God's got us and the fact that he doesn't leave us. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.